Salam alaikum. And peace be with you.
And also with you.
The practice of nonviolence is, I believe, expressed especially by the teaching, love your enemies. Love your enemies, because as Jesus taught, God loves us all. Love your enemies, because as Buddha taught, we are one. Love your enemies, because as Guruji taught, by so doing, I bow to the Buddha in you. Love your enemies. Do what we may think is impossible, because it is rooted in the reality we don't see. Yes, we can and must see through the eyes of our enemies. As Gandhiji taught, our adversaries give us new eyes, the eyes we need to make peace with them if life is to continue on this planet. At the most unlikely moment in history, at the edge of total nuclear war, two enemies learned that truth of peacemaking, to see through the eyes of the other. The truth we most need in this world happened at our most desperate moment. The enemies, John F. Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev, learned the transforming truth of peacemaking at a moment when, if they had not learned it, we were lost. And the world as we know it would have been lost to us all, a world we could never have retrieved. Because two enemies learned the most fundamental truth of peacemaking in the midst of a terrible conflict, then human life continued. But because of their enlightenment, one of them, President John F. Kennedy, was executed as a traitor. John F. Kennedy was in the same dire position every U.S. president has been in since World War II. As president, Kennedy was under the control of what his predecessor, Dwight D. Eisenhower, identified in his farewell address as the military-industrial complex. Eisenhower said, its total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. The military-industrial complex, more powerful today than ever, imprisons the president. A president is always accompanied by a military attaché bearing a nuclear code that can incinerate the earth. That gun to the world is a gun to the president. When he accepts the power to kill everyone, the president becomes a prisoner, morally and politically, to the demands of our national security state. Whether his name is Dwight D. Eisenhower, John F. Kennedy, or Barack Obama, once he accepts nuclear power over the world, his permissible movement as president is confined to a very tight space, tighter than we as citizens might imagine. President Kennedy rebelled against the economic, political, even spiritual influence that President Eisenhower described. During JFK's 2 years and 10 months in power, while that power pressured him relentlessly, he compromised with it to survive a few months. But in the end, he stood his ground and he took the bullets. Kennedy's transformation was prophesied in a strange way by the great Trappist monk and writer whom John just referred to, Thomas Merton. In a letter Merton wrote to a friend in January 1962, 1 year into Kennedy's presidency, the monk summed up the president in a negative yet prophetic way. He said, "I have little confidence in Kennedy. I think he cannot fully measure up to the magnitude of his task and lacks creative imagination and the deeper kind of sensitivity that is needed. Too much the Time and Life magazine mentality, than which I can imagine nothing further in reality from, say, Lincoln. What is needed in the president is really not shrewdness or craft, but what the politicians don't have: depth, humanity, and a certain totality of self-forgetfulness and compassion, not just for individuals, but for humanity as a whole, a deeper kind of dedication. Maybe," Merton wrote, "Kennedy will break through into that someday, by miracle, but such people are before long marked out for assassination." In the Cuban Missile Crisis, President Kennedy had to confront the unspeakable in the form of total nuclear war. At the height of that terrifying conflict that his own anti-Castro policies had helped precipitate, he felt the situation spiraling out of control, especially because of pressures and provocations by his generals. The tipping point of the missile crisis, when war seemed almost inevitable, occurred when a Soviet surface-to-air missile shot down a U.S. U-2 reconnaissance plane over Cuba, killing the Air Force pilot. The Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Executive Committee of the National Security Council had already recommended immediate retaliation in such a case. They now urged an all-out attack on Cuba and the Soviet Union early the next morning. "There was the feeling," said Robert Kennedy, "that the noose was tightening on all of us, on Americans, on humankind, and that the bridges to escape were crumbling." However, JFK called off the Air Force reprisal for the U-2's downing. He continued the search for a peaceful resolution. The President and the Attorney General met in the Oval Office, and JFK at that moment shared with his brother his deepest fear.